Welcome. A story that will touch your heart. Have you ever been in a situation where everything seemed lost? Where circumstances told you there was no way out, but something inside you still believed that God could act? Today, I want to tell you one of the most incredible stories in the Bible. The story of a man who faced an impossible challenge, but chose to trust God until the end. A man who was thrown into the lion's den and, against all odds, came out alive to witness the power of the living God. And this story is not just about Daniel. It is about me, about you, about all of us who face challenges and need to trust that God is in control of everything. So, stay with me until the end, because this message can change the way you see life's difficulties. And before we start, take the opportunity to check if you are already subscribed to the channel, because here we share messages that strengthen faith and transform lives. And if this story speaks to your heart, don't forget to like it and share it with someone who needs this word today. Now let's go to the video. Daniel, a faithful young man in Babylon. The sun was shining brightly over Jerusalem as the armies of Babylon marched through the city, bearing the brunt of their conquest. Nebuchadnezzar, the fearsome Babylonian king, had not only sacked the temple of the Lord, but had also ordered young men of noble birth and royal lineage to be taken captive to serve in his palace. Among these young men was Daniel. At a very young age, perhaps between 15 and 17, Daniel saw his life change dramatically. He was uprooted from his homeland, separated from his family, and transported to a completely different culture. The grandeur of Babylon was overwhelming. Immense palaces, luxurious temples, and colossal statues dedicated to pagan gods. Everything was different from his home, where he had learned from an early age to worship the God of Israel. But Daniel was not alone. With him were three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who would later be known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The four were chosen for rigorous training in the royal palace. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to transform them into loyal servants of the empire, teaching them the language and culture of the Chaldeans. To this end, even their names were changed, in an attempt to erase their Hebrew identity and make them forget the God they served. Despite being surrounded by a foreign culture and tempted to abandon their faith, Daniel decided to remain steadfast. From the beginning, he stood out for his wisdom and character. He understood that he could not control external circumstances, but he could decide in his heart to remain faithful to God. While others conformed, Daniel and his friends refused to be contaminated by the culture and customs that went against their faith. It was this unwavering faithfulness that began to attract attention from an early age. Even though he was a foreigner, Daniel demonstrated intelligence, discernment, and an integrity that set him apart from everyone else. The king's officials quickly realized that he was no ordinary young man. His story of faithfulness was just beginning, and God had grand plans for him in that foreign land. Daniel's rise to power time passed, and Daniel, the young Hebrew taken captive to Babylon, grew up to be a man of great wisdom and discernment. Since the time of King Nebuchadnezzar, his intelligence and faithfulness to God had set him apart from the other wise men and rulers of the kingdom. He interpreted dreams, counseled kings, and remained blameless even in the midst of an empire rife with idolatry and corruption. But now a new ruler was on the throne, Darius the Mede. The Babylonian Empire had fallen, and the Medes and Persians had taken control. In the midst of this transition of power, many high-ranking officials and leaders were replaced, but Daniel remained. His reputation was unshakable. He was not only wise, but also just, upright, and trustworthy. Darius reorganized the government, dividing the kingdom into 120 provinces and appointing satraps to administer them. Above these satraps, the king chose 3 men to oversee the entire kingdom and ensure that there was no fraud or corruption. And among these 3, Daniel stood out. Even though he was an older man, perhaps in his 80s, his mind remained sharp and his spirit unshakable. He did not seek power for himself, but his dedication and excellence were visible to all. While other leaders sought personal advantage and manipulated the system to enrich themselves, Daniel remained above reproach. His work was impeccable, his decisions were fair, and his honesty was unquestionable. That is why Darius began to consider placing him over the entire kingdom, above all other governors. Daniel would be the king's trusted man, his right-hand man in the administration of the empire. His commitment to truth and his intelligence brought him to this position, but they also aroused envy and hostility. The other rulers, realizing that Daniel was about to be promoted, began to plot against him. They could not bear to see a foreigner, an exiled Jew, rise to such a high position. But there was one problem: Daniel was incorruptible. Unlike others who easily gave in to bribery and dishonesty, Daniel left no room for error. His character was solid, and his faith in God sustained him. And that was when his enemies began to look for another way to bring him down. If they could not find fault with his conduct as an administrator, perhaps they could use his faith against him. Daniel's rise to power was impressive, but his greatest test was yet to come. Little did he know that his faithfulness to God would lead him to a test that would forever be etched in history. The envy of the governors and satraps, the royal palace was bustling with activity. Amidst luxurious corridors and halls adorned with gold and precious stones, the highest officials of the kingdom gathered to discuss the affairs of the empire. But not all were focused on the good of King Darius. Between exchanged glances and discreet whispers, a dark feeling grew among the governors and satraps. Envy. Daniel was a man of integrity, a loyal servant, someone who did not seek glory for himself. Yet, his rise aroused resentment. How could an exiled Jew, a foreigner who did not even worship the gods of the empire, occupy the highest position in government after the king? How could someone who did not make corrupt deals, who did not bow to dirty politics and secret dealings, be about to rule over them? Envy has a destructive power. What began as a simple annoyance soon turned into a cunning plan. They needed to find a way to bring Daniel down before it was too late. They searched through documents, investigated his administration, questioned servants and advisors, but they found nothing. Daniel was incorruptible. No bribery, no unfair decisions, not a single mistake. His honesty and dedication were impeccable. It was then that one of the leaders, with a mischievous smile on his face, had an idea. If we can't accuse you of anything in your work, there is only one way: your faith. The eyes of the others lit up. They knew that Daniel would never compromise his loyalty to his God. He prayed 3 times a day without fail, facing Jerusalem. His devotion was known to everyone in the kingdom. If they could make his faith an issue before the king, then they would finally have a way to destroy him. A plan began to be hatched in the palace corridors. Envy turned to conspiracy, and Daniel's fate was about to be put to the test. They just didn't know they were about to witness one of the greatest miracles in history. So, did you already know this story of Daniel in the lion's den? Tell us what you think in the comments and tell us, which part surprised you the most so far? The trap against Daniel. The plot against Daniel was set, but his enemies needed something that would be irresistible to the king. They could not simply accuse him of worshiping their god. They needed to make Darius, without realizing it, sign his own sentence against Daniel. So they met in secret, planning every detail of the coup. How could they convince a powerful and proud king to sign a decree that would only serve to destroy a righteous man? The answer was simple: flattery and vanity. The next day, a delegation of the chief governors and satraps appeared before the throne. Their clothes were impeccable, their faces reflecting reverence and submission. They knew exactly what to say. "O King Darius, live forever," they began, bowing. Darius, seated on his majestic throne, raised an eyebrow in interest. What did these men want? All the governors of the kingdom, prefects, satraps, counselors, and presidents agreed on one thing. The lie began there. Daniel, the most important of the rulers, had not been consulted or agreed on anything. "We suggest that you sign a royal decree and establish an irrevocable law that for 30 days no one may pray or make supplications to any god or man except to you, O king. If anyone disobeys, let him be thrown into the lion's den." The hall fell silent. It was a bold proposal. Banning all prayers and making the king the only authority worthy of supplication was an act of extreme exaltation of power, and Darius, like any monarch of that time, liked the idea of being seen as the center of the empire, the source of justice and life. Without realizing that he was falling into a trap, Darius took the document and signed the royal decree. In those days, the laws of the Medes and Persians could not be revoked, not even by the king himself. Once sealed with the royal ring, that law was final. Daniel's enemies left the palace with smiles of satisfaction. It was only a matter of time now. They knew that Daniel would never stop praying to his God. His faithfulness would be his sentence. What they did not know was that they were about to defy not just a man, but God himself. Daniel defies the decree. The decree was signed. News spread quickly throughout Babylon. Anyone who dared to pray to any god or man except King Darius would be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel's enemies were certain that he would not change his ways. They knew him well. They knew that he prayed 3 times a day, kneeling toward Jerusalem, with the windows of his room open. Daniel did not practice his devotions in secret, nor did he hide his faith. Now he had a choice. Would he bow to the decree, or would he remain faithful to God, even though he knew it could cost him his life? The answer came without hesitation. When Daniel learned of the new law, he did not hide, run away, or try to justify himself. As he did every day, he went up to his room, opened the windows toward Jerusalem, knelt down, and prayed. He did not change his routine for fear of the threat. He didn't try to pray in silence, hidden in a corner. He simply remained faithful, as he had always been. His enemies, who had already set their sights on him, wasted no time. They broke into his house and caught him praying. That was exactly what they wanted. Now they had proof. With a sly smile, they rushed to King Darius. "O king, didn't you sign a royal decree forbidding prayers to any god or man except yourself for 30 days? Darius nodded. "Then know, O king, that Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, has not respected your order. 3 times a day he continues to pray to his God." At that moment, the king's heart sank. He realized that he had fallen into a trap. He knew Daniel. He knew that he was the most upright man in the kingdom. But now he was trapped by his own laws. Darius spent the entire day trying to find a way out. He sought a way to nullify the sentence, to revoke the decree. But the laws of the Medes and Persians were irrevocable. There was nothing he could do. As the sun began to set, the governors returned to the palace. "O king, remember that no law of the Medes and Persians can be annulled. Daniel must be thrown into the den of lions." Darius had no choice. With regret, he gave the order. Daniel was to be thrown into the den. But before the guards took him away, the king looked into the eyes of the man he admired so much and said, "May the God whom you serve continually deliver you." The soldiers then dragged Daniel away and took him to face a fate that for any other man would be the end. But God already had another plan.
King Darius tries to save. Darius was in anguish. He realized too late that he had fallen into a trap. His decree had not been made to honor him, but to destroy a righteous man, the best and most faithful of his governors. Daniel had never caused trouble in the kingdom.
On the contrary, his wisdom and integrity were admired even by the king himself. Darius trusted him more than any other leader. But now, by his own signature, Daniel was condemned. The law of the Medes and Persians was clear. A royal decree could not be revoked, not even by the king himself. And Daniel had been found praying. His enemies had witnesses. They had proof. There was no denying it. But Darius did not give up easily. For hours, he searched for a way to reverse the sentence. He gathered his advisors, examined the ancient records, tried to find loopholes in the law, any detail that might exonerate Daniel. Nothing. With each passing minute, the pressure from the satraps and governors increased. They knew that Darius would try to save Daniel, and so they came to him once more, this time with words as sharp as razors. O king, remember that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or statute established by the king can be revoked. Darius felt the blow. They were right. If he tried to go against the law, his own authority would be questioned. His empire could be destabilized. He realized that, humanly speaking, Daniel was hopeless. But deep down, the king still had hope. He knew Daniel and knew that this man had unshakable faith. Finally, with a heavy heart, Darius gave the order, "Take Daniel to the lion's den." The guards approached, and without resistance, Daniel was taken. But before being thrown into the pit, King Darius, in a final gesture of faith and respect, looked into the eyes of God's servant and declared, "May the God whom you serve continually deliver you." It was a plea. It was a sincere desire. But above all, it was a prophecy. What no man could do, Daniel's God would do. Daniel was about to experience the greatest deliverance of his life. If you enjoy content that strengthens your faith and helps you grow spiritually, subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell so you don't miss any powerful messages. Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. Night had fallen over Babylon. The palace was silent, but within King Darius's heart, a storm was brewing. He knew he was about to lose the most upright man in his kingdom, all because of his own rash decision. But the law was irrevocable. The guards brought Daniel in, leading him to the edge of the den. Inside, lions moved in the shadows, their sharp fangs glinting in the torchlight. The smell of flesh and blood permeated the air. No man had ever entered the den and come out alive. Darius approached. He looked at Daniel one last time and, in a choked voice, said, "Your God, whom you serve continually, will deliver you." It was a statement of hope, but also of despair. Darius could do nothing more. Now everything depended on Daniel's God. The soldiers then threw Daniel into the den. His body fell into the darkness. The roar of the lions grew louder. The hearts of the onlookers sank. And then the king did something unexpected. He ordered a large stone to be placed over the mouth of the den and sealed it with his own royal ring and the seal of the nobles. No one could move that stone without his permission. Perhaps deep down he hoped that by sealing the den he would prevent the conspirators from manipulating the situation. Perhaps he wanted to ensure that Daniel's fate was in God's hands alone. But regardless of the king's intentions, Daniel's fate was already sealed before he even fell into that den, because God was already there. Darius turned and went back to the palace. But that would be the worst night of his life, a night of anguish for the king. The great palace of Babylon was silent. Torches burned softly in the corridors, casting shadows on the gilded marble walls. But that night, there were no banquets, no music, no celebration. The brilliance of royalty meant nothing to King Darius. He was restless. After sealing the lion's den with his royal ring, the king returned to the palace. But his steps were heavy, laden with guilt and worry. His servants were waiting for him, with the table set, the finest dishes and wine chosen for the occasion. But Darius did not touch anything. "Take everything away. I do not wish to eat tonight." The musicians, prepared to entertain the king with soft melodies, noticed his downcast expression and hesitated. One of the servants approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, do you wish us to play for you?" Darius merely shook his head. "No, leave me alone." He walked to his chambers, but sleep would not come. He lay down on the silken bed, but his mind was far from there. All he could see was Daniel, a righteous man, a faithful man, falling into the dark pit, surrounded by hungry beasts. What if he was wrong? What if Daniel's God did not deliver him? The thought of losing Daniel was distressing. He knew that the other governors and satraps wanted him dead out of envy. But had he not himself contributed to this injustice? The dawn was approaching, but Darius could not find peace. He paced back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the night. The wind blew through the palace balconies, bringing with it the distant sound of the sleeping city. But the king did not sleep. His thoughts were a whirlwind. He wondered, what kind of God is this that Daniel serves? Is he powerful enough to save him? He had heard about the miracles of the God of Israel, Daniel's people told stories about the Red Sea parting, about cities being destroyed by a simple touch of divine power, about prophets who survived the impossible. But was any of this true? Darius wanted to believe. He needed to believe. Time seemed to drag on. Every second was torture. He wished the night would end so he could run to the den and see for himself if Daniel was still alive. Dawn seemed to be taking longer than ever that day, but when the first rays of the sun began to touch the palace walls, Darius didn't wait any longer. He had to know. He dressed quickly and, without wasting time, ran toward the lion's den. His heart was beating fast. His breath was short. But one question kept running through his mind. Would Daniel have survived? What did this story teach you? How have you seen God act in your life? Leave your comment below and click the like button, because that will help this message reach more people. Daniel's deliverance. The sky was still tinged with orange and gold when King Darius hurried out of the palace. His heart was pounding in his chest as his feet pounded against the cold floor. He could not waste any more time. With each step he took, more anxiety filled his chest. He did not know what he would find when he reached the lion's den. Would Daniel still be alive? Or had his body already been torn apart by the hungry beasts? The guards protecting the den were astonished to see the king approaching so early. They were accustomed to seeing lazy kings who slept late and were served in comfort. But this morning, Darius seemed like a completely different man. Without hesitation, he approached the large stone that sealed the entrance to the den. His voice was filled with anguish, but also with a hint of hope. "Daniel, servant of the living God," he cried, "has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" The silence that followed seemed like an eternity. Everyone present held their breath. The cold morning wind blew, stirring the dust on the ground. The guards exchanged glances, waiting only to see the disappointment on the king's face. But then a voice emerged from the depths of the cave, a firm, strong, and living voice. "O king, live forever," Daniel replied. Darius' eyes widened. He was alive, Daniel continued, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they would not harm me, for I was found innocent before him. And also against you, O king, I have committed no crime." The king could hardly believe what he was hearing. An immense joy took over his face. He turned to the guards and shouted with authority, "Get him! Out of there! Right now!" The soldiers rushed forward, removed the stone, and lowered ropes for Daniel. He emerged unharmed, without a single scratch. His countenance was serene, as if he had spent the night in peace. Darius was amazed. Daniel's God was real, and he was powerful. But as the king was still processing the miracle before his eyes, his expression changed. Now he knew he had been deceived. He knew that those governors and satraps had plotted against Daniel, and this would not go unpunished. What an incredible testimony. If this story has impacted you so far, imagine how many people also need to hear this message of faith. Share this video with someone who is facing a challenge and needs to remember that God still works miracles. The king's revenge on the conspirators. The silence that followed Daniel's rescue was quickly replaced by murmurs, expressions of astonishment, and looks of terror. Everyone present knew that something supernatural had happened. Daniel had been thrown into a den full of hungry lions and had emerged without a single scratch. It was impossible to explain this with human logic. Daniel's God had done the impossible. But while many were amazed, others began to worry. The satraps and governors, those who had plotted against Daniel, began to feel their blood run cold in their veins. They had rejoiced the night before, certain that they had eliminated their rival, and now they were watching King Darius himself declare his disbelief and admiration at this miracle. But the king's expression began to change. The relief of seeing Daniel alive turned to something darker: anger. This message can change lives. If God has spoken to you this far, send this video to someone who needs this word of faith and encouragement. Together, we can bring this story to more people. Continuing. Darius realized that he had been manipulated. Those men were not concerned with his honor as king. They were not interested in a decree to glorify him. It was all a trap to eliminate a righteous man. And now he knew the truth. The king slowly turned to the conspirators, and they realized they had nowhere left to run. Darius raised his voice, his authority ringing in the air. "Bring those who conspired against Daniel." The soldiers immediately moved, grabbing the governors and satraps who had devised the plan. Their faces turned pale. They tried to argue, but their voices trembled with fear. They knew they were doomed. "Your Majesty, there has been a misunderstanding," one of them tried to say. "It was all for the good of the kingdom," another pleaded. But Darius did not listen. He now saw those men for what they really were: envious, manipulative, and murderous. He looked at Daniel and saw the serenity on his face. That man, even in the face of death, had not tried to defend himself. He had trusted completely in his God. As for the conspirators, they were men who plotted in the shadows, using lies to destroy the righteous. Darius could not allow people like that to continue ruling by his side. Then his voice echoed through the place, firm and unquestionable. "Throw them into the lion's den, they and their families." The soldiers obeyed immediately. The same men who had plotted against Daniel were now thrown to the same fate they had planned for him. But this time, there was no miracle. Before their bodies even touched the bottom of the den, the lions had already jumped on them, tearing them to pieces in the air. Those who had trusted in their own evil schemes now reaped the consequences. The scene was brutal and swift, a cruel end for those who had plotted evil. The kingdom, previously filled with doubt and envy, was now filled with fear. Everyone witnessed the power of Daniel's God, a God who delivers those who trust in him and brings judgment upon those who rise up against his servants. But King Darius was not finished yet. He had seen what Daniel's God was capable of doing, and he would not allow the name of this God to be ignored. So he made a decision that would change the history of Babylon. He would proclaim to the world who the true God was. God honored Daniel because he remained faithful, and he also wants to act in your life. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now to receive more messages of faith and encouragement. Let's grow spiritually together. Darius's decree in favor of Daniel's God. The sun was already shining on the horizon when King Darius, still shocked by what he had witnessed, returned to the palace. His mind was filled with a single thought: Daniel's God was real and powerful. He, a powerful king, ruler of one of the greatest empires on earth, found himself dwarfed by the greatness of that God. None of the gods of Babylon had ever done anything like it. No idol of gold or silver could have delivered someone from a den full of hungry lions. But Daniel's God did, and this truth could not be ignored. Darius sat on his throne, took a scroll, and ordered the scribes, "Write a decree. I want the whole earth to know who the true God is." The scribes dipped their pens in the ink and waited. The king took a deep breath and then began to dictate, his voice echoing throughout the royal hall. "I make a decree that men in all the provinces of my kingdom will tremble in fear before the God of Daniel." The scribes continued to write, quickly, paying close attention to every word that came from the king's lips. For he is the living God and endures forever, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will endure until the end. Darius stood up and with a firm gaze declared, "He delivers and saves and works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." When the words were recorded, the king sealed the decree with his royal ring. Then he ordered, "Let this decree be sent to all the provinces of my kingdom, so that everyone may know the God of Daniel." The messengers set out at once, carrying the king's order to the farthest corners of the empire. Soon entire nations would know the name of Daniel's God. Daniel, through his faithfulness, not only survived the lion's den, but also witnessed the glory of God being proclaimed to all Babylon, and so Daniel prospered in the days of Darius, and also in the days of Cyrus the Persian. Conclusion: the story of Daniel in the lion's den is more than a story of deliverance. It is proof that God honors those who remain faithful to him. Even in a pagan empire, far from his homeland, surrounded by jealous enemies, Daniel remained steadfast. He did not compromise his faith. He did not bow down to threats, and God honored him in a way that no one could deny. What can we learn from this story? Faithfulness to God is worth it, regardless of the circumstances. Even when all seems lost, God has the power to deliver us. God uses the faithfulness of his servants to manifest his glory to the world, and so Daniel's story became an everlasting testimony, a testimony that the living God reigns over all things, in Babylon, in Persia, and to this day. Daniel continues to thrive, the honor of a faithful servant. The events of that terrible night were etched in the history of the kingdom. The miracle in the lion's den not only saved Daniel's life, but it also changed the course of the nation. King Darius, a powerful ruler, saw with his own eyes the working of a God greater than any king or empire. After Daniel was pulled from the den without a scratch, word spread quickly. In the palace halls, in the marketplaces, and on the bustling streets of Babylon, Daniel's name was spoken with respect and admiration. How could a man survive an entire night among hungry lions? How could anyone escape such a cruel death sentence? The answer was clear to all. Daniel's God was real, powerful, and faithful to those who served him with integrity. King's confidence. Darius, deeply impacted, not only acknowledged Daniel's God, but decreed that the entire nation should fear and honor him. This was an extraordinary feat. A foreign king who served other gods now publicly declared that Daniel's God was the living God, the one who reigns forever and has the power to save. But the story did not stop there. Darius realized that Daniel was not only a man of faith, but also a wise and upright administrator. Even surrounded by envious people who tried to destroy him, Daniel remained steadfast, and this only made his reputation grow even greater. The king then elevated him to an even higher position within the government. Daniel began to play a prominent role, guiding the king with discernment, administering the affairs of the empire with justice, and bringing prosperity to the nation. Life of faithfulness and wisdom. The years passed, and Daniel continued to serve with excellence. His faithfulness did not depend on favorable circumstances or human recognition. From his youth, when he was taken captive to Babylon, until his old age, he remained steadfast in his faith. Governments changed, kings came and went, but Daniel remained. He served under Nebuchadnezzar, then under Belshazzar, now under Darius, and later under Cyrus the Persian. Even in the face of political change and challenges, Daniel prospered because his trust was not in men, but in the God who sustained him. The legacy of a servant of God. Daniel's story does not end with just one of a man who survived a night with lions. It is the story of someone who, throughout his life, chose to honor God above all else. In return, God honored him before the kings of the earth. His name became synonymous with integrity, wisdom, and unwavering faith. His testimony has spanned generations and continues to this day, inspiring all those who face challenges, persecutions, and trials. And so, Daniel continued to prosper, not because he sought power or riches, but because he put God first. And he who honors God will be honored by him. And now I want to hear from you. What struck you most about this story? Leave your comment below, and don't forget to like this message if it spoke to your heart. This helps me a lot to continue bringing content that builds your life. Daniel continues to thrive, the honor of a faithful servant. The events of that terrible night were etched in the history of the kingdom. The miracle in the lion's den not only saved Daniel's life, but it also changed the course of the nation. King Darius, a powerful ruler, saw with his own eyes the working of a God greater than any king or empire. After Daniel was pulled from the den without a scratch, word spread quickly. In the palace halls, in the marketplaces, and on the bustling streets of Babylon, Daniel's name was spoken with respect and admiration. How could a man survive an entire night among hungry lions? How could anyone escape such a cruel death sentence? The answer was clear to all. Daniel's God was real, powerful, and faithful to those who served him with integrity. King's confidence. Darius, deeply impacted, not only acknowledged Daniel's God, but decreed that the entire nation should fear and honor him. This was an extraordinary feat. A foreign king who served other gods now publicly declared that Daniel's God was the living God, the one who reigns forever and has the power to save. But the story did not stop there. Darius realized that Daniel was not only a man of faith, but also a wise and upright administrator. Even surrounded by envious people who tried to destroy him, Daniel remained steadfast, and this only made his reputation grow even greater. The king then elevated him to an even higher position within the government. Daniel began to play a prominent role, guiding the king with discernment, administering the affairs of the empire with justice, and bringing prosperity to the nation. Life of faithfulness and wisdom. The years passed, and Daniel continued to serve with excellence. His faithfulness did not depend on favorable circumstances or human recognition. From his youth, when he was taken captive to Babylon, until his old age, he remained steadfast in his faith. Governments changed, kings came and went, but Daniel remained. He served under Nebuchadnezzar, then under Belshazzar, now under Darius, and later under Cyrus the Persian. Even in the face of political change and challenges, Daniel prospered because his trust was not in men, but in the God who sustained him. The legacy of a servant of God. Daniel's story does not end with just one of a man who survived a night with lions. It is the story of someone who, throughout his life, chose to honor God above all else. In return, God honored him before the kings of the earth. His name became synonymous with integrity, wisdom, and unwavering faith. His testimony has spanned generations and continues to this day, inspiring all those who face challenges, persecutions, and trials. And so, Daniel continued to prosper, not because he sought power or riches, but because he put God first. And he who honors God will be honored by him. And now I want to hear from you. What struck you most about this story? Leave your comment below and don't forget to like this message if it spoke to your heart. This helps me a lot to continue bringing content that builds your life. Daniel continues to thrive, the honor of a faithful servant. The events of that terrible night were etched in the history of the kingdom. The miracle in the lion's den not only saved Daniel's life, but it also changed the course of the nation. King Darius, a powerful ruler, saw with his own eyes the working of a God greater than any king or empire. After Daniel was pulled from the den without a scratch, word spread quickly. In the palace halls, in the marketplaces, and on the bustling streets of Babylon, Daniel's name was spoken with respect and admiration. How could a man survive an entire night among hungry lions? How could anyone escape such a cruel death sentence? The answer was clear to all. Daniel's God was real, powerful, and faithful to those who served him with integrity. King's confidence. Darius, deeply impacted, not only acknowledged Daniel's God, but decreed that the entire nation should fear and honor him. This was an extraordinary feat. A foreign king who served other gods now publicly declared that Daniel's God was the living God, the one who reigns forever and has the power to save. But the story did not stop there. Darius realized that Daniel was not only a man of faith, but also a wise and upright administrator. Even surrounded by envious people who tried to destroy him, Daniel remained steadfast, and this only made his reputation grow even greater. The king then elevated him to an even higher position within the government. Daniel began to play a prominent role, guiding the king with discernment, administering the affairs of the empire with justice, and bringing prosperity to the nation. Life of faithfulness and wisdom. The years passed, and Daniel continued to serve with excellence. His faithfulness did not depend on favorable circumstances or human recognition. From his youth, when he was taken captive to Babylon, until his old age, he remained steadfast in his faith. Governments changed, kings came and went, but Daniel remained. He served under Nebuchadnezzar, then under Belshazzar, now under Darius, and later under Cyrus the Persian. Even in the face of political change and challenges, Daniel prospered because his trust was not in men, but in the God who sustained him. The legacy of a servant of God. Daniel's story does not end with just one of a man who survived a night with lions. It is the story of someone who, throughout his life, chose to honor God above all else. In return, God honored him before the kings of the earth. His name became synonymous with integrity, wisdom, and unwavering faith. His testimony has spanned generations and continues to this day, inspiring all those who face challenges, persecutions, and trials. And so, Daniel continued to prosper, not because he sought power or riches, but because he put God first. And he who honors God will be honored by him. And now I want to hear from you. What struck you most about this story? Leave your comment below and don't forget to like this message if it spoke to your heart. This helps me a lot to continue bringing content that builds your life.